The massive crystal dome of Zephyria Prime stretched high above the gathered delegates, its transparent walls catching the light of 3 suns and casting rainbow patterns across the chamber floor. Ambassador Krelthax stood at the center podium, his insect-like body rigid with authority, as his compound eyes surveyed the assembled representatives of 47 different worlds. His mandibles clicked together in a rhythm that his species used to show satisfaction. Today was a day he had been planning for months. Today, the upstart humans would finally learn their place in the galactic order. Around him, the most powerful beings in the known galaxy had gathered. The towering, crystal-skinned Zephyrians floated in their energy fields. The tentacled Aquarians bubbled in their water-filled suits. The rock-like Terrans sat motionless as mountains. Each species had earned their position through centuries of proper submission to the Council's will. Honored delegates, Krelthax began, his voice carrying through the translation devices that allowed all species to understand each other. We face a crisis that threatens the very foundation of our civilization. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some delegates shifted in their seats, others remained perfectly still, as was their custom. The species known as humans, he continued, spitting the word like it tasted bad, have committed crimes against our most sacred laws. They have terraformed dead worlds without seeking our permission. They have refused to acknowledge our authority over their expansion. And most shocking of all, they treat every species they meet as equals, completely ignoring the natural hierarchy that has kept peace in our galaxy for over 3,000 years. The reaction was immediate. Several delegates gasped. Others made sounds of disgust in their own languages. The hierarchs of Vega actually stood up in their crystalline exoskeletons, a sign of extreme displeasure. This cannot continue, Krelthax declared, raising his forearms for silence. If we allow this behavior, other species might begin to think. They too can ignore our authority. The order we have built will crumble into chaos. Meanwhile, millions of light years away on Earth, President Ji-Woo Kim sat in her office in Geneva, watching the transmission on a holographic display. The late afternoon sun streamed through her windows, casting long shadows across her desk, covered with reports and documents. She appeared calm, almost bored as she listened to the alien ambassador's speech. Beside her desk, Minister Tae-ho Park paced back and forth, his hands clasped behind his back. His usually neat black hair was slightly disheveled from running. His fingers through it, a nervous habit he had developed during his years in government service. "Madam President," he whispered urgently, leaning close to her chair, "this is serious. They are talking about cutting us off completely. No trade, no communication, no passage through their space lanes." Ji-Woo nodded slightly, but kept her eyes on the hologram. Krelthax was now listing humanity's crimes in detail, his voice growing, more angry with each point. On the screen, the alien ambassador spread his arms wide. "Therefore, by unanimous vote of this council, we give the humans 30 standard galactic cycles to submit completely to our authority. They must stop all terraforming projects, surrender control of their military forces, and accept their proper place in the galactic hierarchy. If they refuse, they will face total isolation from civilized space." The chamber erupted in cheers and sounds of approval from the various species. Some banged appendages on their seats, others flashed lights, and a few released pleasant-smelling gases into the air. Tae-ho stopped pacing and stared at his president. 30 cycles, Madam President. That is barely 6 weeks in Earth time. They want us to surrender everything we have built, everything we have worked for." Ji-Woo finally looked away from the hologram and picked up a tablet from her desk. She scrolled through several documents before finding the one she wanted. The Mars Agricultural Division reports that the new wheat strain is exceeding all expectations. Production should increase by 40% next quarter. "Madam President, did you hear what I said? The Galactic Council is threatening us with complete isolation." "I heard you." Ji-Woo set down the tablet and looked at her advisor with calm, dark eyes. "File their message with the other diplomatic correspondents." Tae-ho blinked in confusion. "File it? But this is an ultimatum. They are demanding our complete submission. The trade embargo alone could cripple our economy, and if they close their space lanes to us, our colony ships will have to take routes that are years longer." Ji-Woo stood up slowly, and walked to her window, looking out at the city below. People moved along the sidewalks, going about their daily lives, unaware that their planet had just been threatened by the most powerful alliance in the galaxy. "Minister Park," she said quietly, her voice carrying the same calm tone she had used throughout the conversation. "In all your years of diplomatic service, how many times have you seen a bully actually follow through on their threats when they realize their target is not afraid?" Taeho opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, thinking. "They will call back," Jiwoo said, turning back to her desk and picking up another report. This one was about the new fusion reactors being installed throughout the Jupiter system. The days crawled by like wounded animals across the surface of Zephyria Prime. Ambassador Krelthax had worn a path in the crystal floor of his private chamber from his constant pacing. His 4 legs moved in a nervous rhythm as he walked back and forth, waiting for some word from the human worlds. 25 cycles had passed since the Council delivered their ultimatum. 25 cycles of complete silence from Earth and all her colonies. Not a single message, not even an acknowledgement that the humans had received the Council's demands. It was as if the entire human species had simply chosen to ignore the most powerful alliance in the galaxy. Krelthax paused in his pacing to stare at the communication console that sat silent and dark on his desk. In all his years as an ambassador, he had never encountered such a response. When the Council spoke, species listened. They might argue, they might negotiate, they might even refuse at first, but they always responded. The silence from human space was more unsettling than any angry reply would have been. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Krelthax rushed to his console, hoping finally to see a transmission from Earth. Instead, the worried face of Council. Observer Vexthal appeared on the screen, his blue-scaled features creased with confusion. "Ambassador," Vexthal said without greeting, "you need to see the latest monitoring reports. The data makes no sense." "What do you mean?" Krelthax asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. "The humans," Vexthal replied, sending a data package through the communication link. "Their activity has increased across all systems, not decreased, increased." Krelthax opened the files and felt his compound eyes widen in disbelief. The numbers on his screen showed human operations running far beyond their normal levels. It was impossible. Species that faced Council ultimatums were supposed to reduce their activities to show proper fear and respect for Council authority. On Venus, the atmospheric processing stations were working at levels that should have been physically impossible. Director Hai-Jin Lee had not only refused to halt the terraforming project, but had actually pushed the massive machines to operate at 150% of their designed capacity. The poisonous atmosphere of Venus was being converted to breathable air faster than ever before. "Are they insane?" Vexthal muttered from the screen. "Do they not understand that defying the Council means economic and social destruction?" Krelthax scrolled through more data, his anxiety growing with each report. At Lunar Station, Admiral Subin Choi had launched 3 enormous colony ships in the past week alone. Each vessel was the size of a small city and carried 50,000 human volunteers along with enough supplies and equipment to establish completely self-sufficient colonies on distant worlds. But these were not just any colonies. The ships were heading toward star systems far beyond Council space, regions that would take decades to reach, using conventional faster-than-light travel. It was as if the humans were preparing to leave the entire galactic neighborhood rather than submit to Council authority. In the asteroid belts around Jupiter, mining coordinator Donghyun Nam had doubled all extraction quotas. Hundreds of mining ships swarmed through the rocky debris, harvesting rare metals and minerals at a pace that made Council observers dizzy to watch. The asteroid belts buzzed with constant activity as automated ships moved back and forth between the rocks and the processing stations. "Perhaps," suggested Councillor Yithmar when the 3 beings held an emergency conference later that day, "the humans did not understand the severity of our ultimatum. Maybe their translation equipment is not as advanced as we assumed." The Councillor's tentacles writhed nervously as he spoke, a sign of deep anxiety among his species. His large, dark eyes reflected the worry that all Council members were beginning to feel. Krelthax turned away from the screen and resumed his pacing. "Impossible," he said, his mandibles clicking together in frustration. "The translation was perfect. We used the same systems that have worked for thousands of other species. They understood every word." "Then why are they acting as if nothing happened?" Vexthul asked. "Every other species in the galaxy knows that defying the Council means destruction. Trade stops, communication ends, and the offending species is left to survive on their own resources. Most civilizations cannot last more than a few years under such conditions." Krelthax paused at his window and looked out at the crystal spires of the Council capital. For 3,000 years, this system had worked perfectly. Species that stepped out of line were quickly brought back into proper behavior through economic pressure and social isolation. The threat of being cut off from galactic civilization was usually enough to make even the most rebellious worlds submit. But the humans were not behaving like any species the Council had ever encountered. Instead of showing fear or trying to negotiate, they seemed to be preparing for something much larger than simple resistance. Their increased activity suggested they were not afraid of isolation at all. "What if," Yithmar said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "what if they do not need us as much as we assumed they did?" The question hung in the air like a dangerous gas, poisoning the confidence that had carried the Council for millennia. For the first time in his long career, Ambassador Krelthax began to wonder if the humans were not the primitive, dependent species the Council had believed them to be. The silence from Earth was indeed deafening, but perhaps it was not the silence of fear. Perhaps it was the silence of a species that had already decided they were better off alone. The Council delegation's ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, expecting to find the same modest collection of planets they had catalogued decades earlier. Instead, Ambassador Krelthax and his team found themselves staring at something that defied all their expectations. Where once there had been a simple star system with a few inhabited worlds, now there stretched before them a vast network of gleaming structures that caught and reflected the light of Earth's sun like scattered diamonds. Massive orbital habitats rotated slowly around every planet, each one large enough to house millions of beings. Gleaming space elevators stretched from planetary surfaces up into orbit, their cables so thin they were almost invisible but clearly carrying a constant stream of traffic. "This cannot be the same system," whispered observer Vexthul, his blue scales turning pale as he stared at the display screens. "Our records show nothing like this." Councillor Yithmar's tentacles curled and uncurled nervously as he watched ships moving between the structures. These were not the crude vessels they expected from a young species. Instead, sleek craft that seemed to bend space around themselves glided effortlessly through the void, moving in ways that violated everything the Council knew about physics. "How long has it been since our last detailed survey of this system?" Krelthax asked, though he dreaded the answer. 47 standard years, Vexthul replied after checking his records. But this level of construction should have taken centuries, not decades. Before they could process what they were seeing, a communication signal reached their ship. The voice that greeted them was warm and friendly, speaking perfect galactic standard with only a slight accent. "Welcome to the Sol system," said the voice. "This is Captain Inho Jiang of Sol Station. We were not expecting Council representatives, but you are certainly welcome here. How may we assist you today?" Krelthax cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "We are here on official Council business. We must speak with your planetary leaders immediately about your compliance with our recent ultimatum." There was a brief pause. Then Captain Jiang responded with the same friendly tone. "Of course, Ambassador. I would be happy to arrange a meeting. Please dock at Bay 12, and I will escort you personally to our diplomatic facilities." As their ship approached Sol Station, the Council delegation got their first close look at human engineering. The station was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, but it moved through space with the grace of a dancer. Its surface was covered with parks and gardens, visible through transparent sections, while massive solar collectors and fusion reactors provided power for what must be millions of inhabitants. Captain Jiang met them at the airlock, a middle-aged human with kind eyes and a genuine smile. He wore a simple blue uniform that somehow managed to look both casual and official at the same time. As he led them through the station's corridors, the delegation could not help but notice the advanced technology integrated seamlessly into every surface. "I apologize, but President Kim is not available today," Captain Zhang said as they walked. "She is currently inspecting the new Galaxy-class colony ships. Perhaps next week would be better for your meeting?" Krelthax stopped walking so suddenly that Councillor Yithmar bumped into him from behind. "Galaxy-class?" he stammered. "What do you mean by Galaxy-class?" Captain Zhang turned with a smile that seemed genuinely excited. "Oh yes, quite impressive, really. We are preparing for expansion beyond the local group of galaxies. The new ships can carry entire cities worth of people and supplies. President Kim wanted to personally review the life support systems before we begin the longer journeys." "Beyond the local group?" Vexthul whispered, his voice barely audible. "They are planning to leave this entire region of space?" "Well, not leave exactly," Captain Zhang replied cheerfully. "More like expand. We have found so many interesting worlds out there, and there is plenty of room for everyone. Would you like to see the construction bays? The ships are truly magnificent." Through the viewing ports of the diplomatic lounge, the council delegation watched in growing horror as ships the size of small moons moved through space around them. These vessels did not use the conventional faster-than-light drives that every other species relied on. Instead, they seemed to fold space around themselves, traveling distances that should have taken months in mere hours. But these were not the desperate preparations of a cornered species facing annihilation. This was the calm, methodical expansion of a civilization that had already outgrown its birthplace and was preparing to outgrow its entire galactic neighborhood. "We really must speak with your leadership about the Council's ultimatum," Krelthax insisted, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Captain Zhang nodded politely. "Of course. Let me connect you with our diplomatic corps." A few minutes later, a young human appeared on the communication screen. He looked barely old enough to be out of school, with neat black hair and a respectful but confident demeanor. "Greetings, honored delegates," said the young man. "I am junior diplomat Minho Yun. I understand you have concerns about our recent activities." "We delivered an ultimatum," Krelthax said through gritted mandibles. "Your species has 30 cycles to submit to council authority or face complete isolation." Minho nodded thoughtfully, as if he were considering the weather forecast rather than a threat that had brought entire civilizations to their knees. "Thank you for your concern about our development," he said with perfect politeness. "We truly appreciate the Council's interest in our activities. However, after careful consideration, we have decided to pursue an independent path. We wish you well in your future endeavors and hope that our species can maintain friendly relations despite our different approaches to galactic civilization." The transmission ended with a soft chime, leaving the Council delegation staring at a blank screen. The crushing politeness of the response was somehow more devastating than any angry rejection could have been. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened with unprecedented urgency. Ambassador Krelthax stood before the assembled delegates, his compound eyes burning with desperate determination. The humiliation of humanity's polite dismissal had festered in his mind for days, and now he was ready to unleash the full power of the Council's authority. "Fellow delegates," he announced, his voice echoing through the crystal chamber, "the humans have made their choice. They have rejected our generous offer to join civilized society. Now they must face the consequences of their arrogance, the Hun." Assembled species murmured their agreement. For 3,000 years, the threat of isolation had been their ultimate weapon. No species could survive being cut off from galactic trade, communication, and the hyperspace routes that connected the civilized worlds. "Seal every hyperspace lane that leads to human territory," Krelthax commanded. "Implement absolute trade restrictions. Any Council species that makes contact with Earth or its colonies will face immediate expulsion from our alliance." Within hours, the machinery of galactic isolation began to turn. Hyperspace beacons that had guided ships along the fastest routes to human space went dark. Trade agreements worth billions of credits were cancelled. Communication networks that had carried messages between worlds for centuries suddenly excluded anything to or from human territory. The Council delegates sat back in their chambers, confident that within weeks the humans would come crawling back, begging for readmission to galactic society. They had seen it happen before with other rebellious species. Isolation always worked, but within 3 weeks reports began arriving that made no sense at all. Captain Yonsubei materialized her sleek vessel in the middle of Altarian space, appearing without any warning in a flash of twisted light that had nothing to do with conventional hyperspace travel. The Altarian defense fleet scrambled to intercept what they assumed was an invasion, but the human captain simply broadcast a friendly greeting on all frequencies. "Hello, friends," her voice carried across the communication channels with warmth and humor. "I am Captain Bay of the Terran Commonwealth. I understand you might be interested in some new trade opportunities." Governor Thexivol of Altair IV found himself staring at a holographic trade proposal that offered prices 3 times higher than anything the Council had ever provided. The humans wanted to buy Altarian crystal formations, but instead of demanding tribute and submission, they offered advanced technology, medical supplies, and most incredibly, respect. "How did you get here?" the governor asked, his 6 eyes blinking in confusion. "The Council sealed all hyperspace routes to your territory." Captain Bay smiled, her expression visible through the holographic projection. "We have our own ways of traveling between stars. The Council's hyperspace network is quite impressive, but it is not the only method of faster-than-light travel. On Rigel 4, Ambassador So Young Han was establishing something that had never existed before in galactic history. She called it a Commonwealth Embassy, and unlike the Council's administrative centers that demanded tribute and enforced hierarchy, this building offered something revolutionary: equal partnership. "Join us as equals," she explained to the assembled Rigelian leadership. "No tribute required, no hierarchy enforced. Each species gets the same voice in our decisions, regardless of their military power or economic strength." The Rigelian Chancellor, whose people had served as second-class citizens in the Council for over 800 years, found herself speechless. Equal representation, no tribute. It seemed too good to be true. Meanwhile, in the poverty-stricken Outer Rim territories, Dr. Kyungmin Lim was sharing medical technology that the Council had jealously guarded for centuries. Her mobile hospital ship moved from world to world, treating diseases that had plagued entire species, asking for nothing in return except friendship. "Why are you doing this?" asked a Zephyrian healer whose people had been denied advanced medical treatment because they could not afford the Council's prices. Dr. Lim smiled as she handed over a device that could cure genetic disorders with a simple scan. "Because everyone deserves to be healthy and happy. That is reason enough." The effect of these actions rippled across the galaxy like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Species that had never questioned the Council's authority began to ask uncomfortable questions. Why did they need to pay tribute to maintain their membership? Why were some species considered more important than others? Why had they accepted a system that treated them as subjects rather than partners? The Altarians were the first to make the bold decision. In a public announcement that shocked the galaxy, they formally withdrew from the Galactic Council and announced their intention to join the human Commonwealth. Governor Thexval's statement was simple but devastating. "We choose partnership over servitude." The Rigelians followed within days, their chancellor declaring that 800 years of second-class citizenship was enough. The mineral-rich Centaurian Federation came next, bringing with them vast wealth and resources that had once flowed to the Council's coffers. Ambassador Krelthax watched from his crystal chamber as his carefully ordered galaxy began to crumble. The monitoring stations reported ship after ship, carrying the blue banner of the human Commonwealth, appearing in systems across the galaxy using technology that made the Council's hyperspace network obsolete. "How is this possible?" demanded Councillor Yithmar during an emergency meeting. "The isolation protocol has never failed before." Krelthax stared at the reports covering his desk, each one detailing another species, choosing to leave the Council for the promise of equal treatment and mutual respect. His mandibles clicked together in a rhythm of despair as he realized the terrible truth. The humans had never needed the Council at all. They had been offering friendship while the Council had been demanding submission. And now, species across the galaxy were choosing partnership over hierarchy, cooperation over coercion. The age of the Galactic Council was ending, and it was ending not with war or revolution, but with the simple, devastating power of a better idea. The great crystal chambers of Zephyria Prime echoed with emptiness. Where once 47 species had gathered in magnificent displays of galactic power, now only 29 delegates sat scattered across the vast space like islands in an ocean of failure. Ambassador Krelthax looked out at the half-empty seats and felt something he had never experienced in his long career: true fear. 6 months had passed since the Council's ultimatum expired. 6 months of watching their carefully constructed empire crumble as species after species chose to leave their ancient alliance. The Altarians had been first, followed quickly by the Rigelians, then the Centaurians with their vast mineral wealth. Each departure had weakened the Council's power and emboldened others to question the system that had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. 18 species had now officially joined the human Commonwealth, taking with them not just their territories and resources, but something far more precious: their dignity. They had chosen partnership over subservience, cooperation over coercion, and the galaxy was changing in ways that terrified the remaining council members. The communication console in Krelthax's chamber chimed softly, displaying a message that made his compound eyes widen with surprise. President Jiwoo Kim of Earth had finally agreed to meet with him, but the terms of the meeting made his mandibles click with nervous tension. She would not come to Zephyria Prime as a supplicant seeking forgiveness. Instead, she invited him to visit her flagship, a vessel called Harmony. 3 days later, Krelthax's shuttle approached the human ship, and he felt his confidence drain away like water through a broken container. Harmony was not just large, it was impossible. The vessel stretched for kilometers in every direction, its hull gleaming with materials that seemed to bend light around them. Compared to this magnificent ship, the Council's most powerful dreadnoughts looked like ancient museum pieces, gathering dust in forgotten corners. The docking bay that received his shuttle was larger than some space stations, filled with craft that moved with the same reality-bending technology he had observed throughout human space. As he walked through the corridors escorted by polite human crew members, Krelthax noticed something that disturbed him deeply. The humans were not alone. Altarian crystal formations decorated the walls alongside Rigelian artwork and Centaurian sculptures. The crew he passed included beings from dozens of different species, all wearing the same blue uniforms, all treated with the same respect regardless of their origin. It was everything the Council stood against, and yet it worked with a harmony that made their ancient hierarchy seem crude and primitive. The meeting room where President Kim waited was both simple and profound. A large round table dominated the space, surrounded by comfortable chairs that could accommodate the unique physiology of many different species. Around that table sat representatives from 37 different worlds, each one an equal participant in whatever decisions were made. President Jiwoo Kim rose as he entered, her expression calm and welcoming despite the circumstances that had brought them together. She appeared exactly as she had during their first communication months ago, confident, unshakable, and completely unimpressed by the Council's attempts at intimidation. "Ambassador Krelthax," she said with a slight bow of respect, "welcome aboard Harmony. Please take a seat wherever you feel comfortable." Krelthax found himself sitting across from the human leader, acutely aware that he was surrounded by species that had once been subjects of Council authority. Now they sat as equals, their voices carrying the same weight as anyone else at the table. "You came to threaten us," President Kim said without preamble, her voice carrying the same calm tone that had infuriated him months earlier. "You assumed we needed your permission to exist, to grow, to treat others with respect." "The order, the hierarchy," Krelthax replied, his mandibles clicking nervously as he tried to defend a system that suddenly seemed indefensible. "It has maintained peace for millennia." Admiral Changminan, a human with steel-gray hair and kind eyes, leaned forward slightly. "Has it?" he asked, gesturing to the diverse gathering around the table. "Or has it simply maintained your power over others who had no choice but to submit?" Before Krelthax could respond, Director Yoonji Seo, a woman with the bearing of someone accustomed to solving complex problems, spoke up. Every species sitting at this table made a choice, Ambassador. They chose cooperation over coercion. They chose partnership over subservience. What does that tell you about the system you defend? Through the massive viewport that dominated one wall of the meeting room, Krelthax could see something that would have been impossible under Council rule. 37 different flags flew alongside humanity's banner, each one representing a species that had chosen freedom over security, equality over hierarchy. Ships from dozens of worlds moved together in perfect coordination, their crews working as partners rather than masters and servants. The silence stretched for long moments as Krelthax struggled to find words that could justify 3,000 years of enforced inequality. Around the table, beings who had once paid tribute to the Council now sat as equals, their prosperity and happiness visible in their bearing. President Kim's voice broke the silence, carrying with it an offer that was both generous and devastating. "Your people are always welcome to join us, Ambassador," she said quietly, "when you are ready to abandon the idea that any species is worth more than another." As Krelthax's shuttle departed from Harmony hours later, he looked back at the magnificent ship and the fleet that surrounded it. The galaxy was transforming around them, changing from a rigid hierarchy built on fear and submission into something new and beautiful, a community of equals working together toward a future none of them could achieve alone. The age of the Galactic Council was ending, not with violence or conquest, but with the simple revolutionary idea that every species deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. And as his shuttle carried him back toward the half-empty chambers of Zephyria Prime, Krelthax found himself wondering if perhaps it was time to stop fighting the future and start embracing it.